I'm Bill Lenderman. This is one of a series of monthly discussions to be held one time a month on Friday, 9 a.m. Mountain Time. The purpose of the discussions is to provide insights into concepts people may not know or don't fully understand, to correct misconceptions about important issues, and to build a community of wise and thoughtful people who know how to use money as a tool. When this portion of the discussion is finished, I'll open up for people who are able to attend live. I'll open up the discussion to those who would like to participate. Today I'd like to cover some subjects just briefly. The first is the limitations of trade. The second is the characteristics of real money. And the third is the historical development of fiat money, fake money, the kind of money we have now. In terms of trade, without a medium of exchange, money, trade is very limited. It would be impossible to get much more advanced in building our own homes, plowing our own gardens with sticks, and raising animals that are domesticated. If a person wanted an iron plow to increase his productivity, as an example, it's too complicated with trade. He would have to hire people to go find minerals. He'd have to hire people to mine the minerals. He'd have to hire people to build ovens to heat up the minerals and extract them from other substances. He'd have to have people to build wagons to transport all these different things to where they're needed. All of those people would have to be paid with chickens or goats or cows or whatever have you. There'd be so many animals traded back and forth in order to get the job done that people wouldn't be able to do the job because they'd be too busy tending their animals. Trade just has specific limitations. Money is the only thing that makes it possible for people to accumulate and then spend as needed, and it doesn't have all the negatives of trade. All kinds of things in the past have been used for money. On one particular island, certain rocks were used for money. In England, for a period of time, sticks were used for money. The sticks were kept in England, in London, England, in a repository, and people kept track of who owed whom by making marks on the sticks. And that, surprisingly, that worked for a number of decades. Shells have been used. In America, when Americans were limited in the amount of money available because of the British mercantile policies, tobacco became a form of money for quite a while. All these different things, rocks, shells, sticks, tobacco, all those kinds of things had their limitations. The only real kind of money turns out to be silver and gold. They meet certain criteria. No other kind of money ever met those kind of criteria. So for the most part, all other kinds of money have been used, sometimes successfully, and then passed away from the scene. But what are the characteristics that make real money? The first is intrinsic worth. They have to have value of their own. Gold and silver, as an example, have value on their own as jewelry, as now as components for electronics, different kinds of things like that. They have to be divisible. In other words, you have to be able to make change. They have to be portable. They have to be durable. Again, if you used a cow or a goat or a chicken or even a seashell or something like tobacco, those things all have the possibility that they can be broken or lost, or they can get sick. They have to be taken care of. All kinds of problems. No such problem exists with silver and gold. They have to have relative scarcity. As a matter of fact, the increase in the number of people in this world is about 3% a year, and the increase in the amount of gold is approximately 3% a year. So there's enough additional gold to handle the new people who are born every year without any inflation. Again, precious metals best fit the definition of real money. We live in a fiat money atmosphere. Every nation in the world has fiat money. Fiat means it has value because the government says so. It's not really money, it's currency. That's something that's used in exchange, but it isn't real money. Again, gold and silver are real money. Well, how does paper money come into being, and how does it gradually become credible so that it becomes used on a daily basis by most individuals? Well, the normal procedure is this. First, the paper money is exchangeable for something valuable. Silver or gold, as in the case of America. China was the first experiment in paper money around the year 800 A.D. It was originally used for convenience. When the government bought something, it would have to pay in iron or brass or bronze or something like that. Well, those things are very heavy. So they issued certificates to the people who would accept those metals in exchange for some transaction. Those people could go and turn in the certificate and get the metals that those certificates stood for. Another way that fiat money becomes accepted is because governments accept them for taxes, and people naturally assume that if the government accepts them for taxes, they have value. Another is they're required by law. For instance, in America, we have a law that says the seller must accept our fiat currency and the buyer must pay in fiat currency, or the transaction is no good. So by law, we're forced to use fiat currency in this country and in every other country in the world. Eventually, with modern technology, countries don't even have to print the money anymore. Most of it is produced electronically, just on an electronic keyboard. If they want to create $1 billion, they just push the 1 and the proper number of zeros, and there's another $1 billion existing in the economy. That's a violation of one of the very requirements for real money, and that is relative scarcity. A little history. Again, paper money started about 800 A.D. in China with the invention of block printing. Again, they started out both commercially and governmentally as receipts for goods. They were called flying money because when the wind blew, this paper money could blow away. Well, this money was developed into a government institution, and finally, by the time Marco Polo in the 13th century visited China, everybody was using this government money. The emperor required it. When Marco Polo came to trade in China, when he touched the border, he had to take all his goods, gold and silver and everything else, trade them for paper money. Then he did all his exchanges, all his buying and selling within China using that paper money. And when he left the country, he exchanged the paper money back for the kinds of goods and gold and silver that he needed. He was greatly impressed, but the problem was the Chinese emperor finally realized, like all other emperors and all other rulers, that he could just simply buy the world by printing more and more and more money. And that's what he did, and finally printed so much paper money that it became worthless. It lasted a long time, relatively, because the Chinese were required to use the paper money. If they refused to use the paper money, they were executed. Now, the Bank of England is the next great example of this fraud of paper money. The King of England wanted to rule the world, like so many other violent rulers of the world. By the time the year 1694 came by, he was basically broke. He ran out of money. He was going to lose his ability to rule the country. So a number of bankers got together and said, look, let's start the Bank of England. If you will promise us immunity from our evil deeds, we'll produce all the money that you need. That was the beginning of the destruction of England. Now the king had as much money as he wanted. he could buy and pay for enormous armies and navies, and he could travel all around the world and conquer nations who didn't have their firepower. As a result, as you know, England began to boast that the sun never set on the British Empire. Well, most of the time, the countries they attacked were native countries who had trade and not good money. So they were very primitive, and they couldn't resist the guns, the cannons, and the bombs that the English had. So they had to capitulate. Finally, England began to pay the price for the treachery of the king. In 1899, gold and silver were found in abundance in the African continent, especially the southern part of Africa. In that region, and a lot of Dutch people had settled. They were called by various names, but they were primarily called Boers. They were Europeans who had settled there. The English attacked the country with the hope of taking over the riches of the gold and the diamonds. The difference was the British Army was not prepared to fight against fellow Europeans. They had been ruling the world by fighting against natives who had spears. And they were used to lining up shoulder to shoulder, opposing a wave of humans running against them carrying spears. So they recruited young men from around England, city boys, slum dwellers. They gave them uniforms and taught them how to parade and spit and polish their uniforms and what have you, but they didn't teach them how to shoot. So what would happen was they would line up shoulder to shoulder. They'd be attacked by the natives. They'd all be told to aim at one time. They'd all be told to shoot at one time. And even if they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn door, enough bullets would hit the charging enemy to destroy the charge and to win the battle. But the Boers, being fellow Europeans and equally equipped with rifles and cannons, they didn't practice human wave attacks. They hid behind rocks and trees and picked off the British from 500 yards, 1,000 yards, even one recorded 1,400-yard shot that killed a British soldier. The British finally did win the war by simply overwhelming the Boers, at least 4-1. But they lost a lot of good men in the process. Then they entered World War I. Nearly the entire population of young men in Britain was wiped out. Then World War II came, and Britain was terribly destroyed and became a third-rate nation, and many, many of their young men were killed in another generation of war. That finally ended Britain's dominancy in the world, their third-rate nation. And what destroyed them? The phony money created by the Bank of England, which allowed their vicious kings to produce such a large and expensive army, navy, marines, and what have you. And they finally went broke. The same kind of thing is happening in America. In 1913, a corrupt Congress met around the Christmas vacation when most of the representatives and senators were on Christmas break. These corrupt people created the Federal Reserve, which is a private institution, a monopoly created by the federal government. Then they gave away control of the American money from the American people and gave it to a private institution, a bank, owned by 12 American banks and other banks. This corrupt organization needed funding, so they also in 1913 created the income tax, which is a direct violation of the American Constitution. They're following the same pattern as Britain. Whenever our corrupt government needs more money, all they have to do is ask the Federal Reserve to create the money out of the air. They spend the money, get deeper and deeper in debt with no idea about keeping a budget of any kind. They're spending the American public blind. The money collected in taxes is barely enough to pay the interest on money due to the Federal Reserve each year. The government actually runs on phony money created every year by the Federal Reserve, and that's how our government works. We are also spending billions of dollars on military hardware, soldiers and sailors and Marines and Air Force and every other kinds of things, and we're breaking the country. And we're using the money to attack countries all over the world and invade countries all over the world, killing millions and millions of people in the process. That money's also being used to pay for the murder of babies. We're up to around 53 million American babies who have been murdered as a result of using this phony money for that purpose. Well, that's a brief idea and understanding of trade, real money, and the development of fiat money. In America, we're required to use that fiat money to pay taxes. We're forced to use it in transactions. And someday, all that will come to an end because the whole process will blow up. But in the meantime, there are great booms and busts created by the federal government, and there's a great deal of injustice and the greatest theft in the history of the world, the theft being the destruction of the value of American money. Recognize one thing. The definition of inflation is simple. It's the increase in the supply of money. The government lies to us and tells us inflation is the increase in prices. That has nothing to do with inflation. It's a result of inflation. The more of any commodity, and money is a commodity, the more of the commodity that exists, the less valuable it becomes. Since 1913, an American dollar now has degenerated to the point where it's probably worth about a penny and a half, maybe 2 pennies at most. And that's the circumstances we're in right now. I hope you found this useful as a review and as a complete understanding of trade and money. Now we'll open up the discussion for questions or thoughts or anything you want to share.